But from a management point of view, Cathal, it's really, really helpful to divide them into two categories. And one of them being managed hedges, or I call them topped hedges, and the other category being those which are not topped, possibly never have been or are not going to be in the future, and we call them tree-lined hedges.
It's great to be back with another Environment Edge podcast, and you're very welcome to the show. What's the difference between a topped hedge and a tree-lined hedge? Does it really matter? Today we're joined by Teagasc Countryside Management Specialist, Dr. Keena, to discuss.
Before we chat to Catherine, we just want to let you know about National Hedgerow Week, which is running from Friday the 29th of August and aims to raise awareness about the importance of hedgerows for agriculture, biodiversity and climate. Events are free and open to all, including farmers, contractors and anyone interested in hedgerows.
I'm Carl Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Lynn.
Your Teagasc Sustainability Advisors. And we're back for another Environment Edge podcast, number 109, and here we go.
Gosh, Catherine, time is absolutely flying. We're into another Teagasc Hedgerow Week. What are the main objectives of the Hedgerow Week, and how does Teagasc promote the importance of hedgerows for biodiversity during this week?
Hedgerow Week is really about promoting the importance of hedges in the Irish countryside. And this year, Teagasc and the Heritage Council have joined together to spread the message, because it's very much a message among farmers and, the general public in the countryside. Everyone is near a hedge, and we want everyone to appreciate it. Sometimes because it's so common, it's not as appreciated as something rare. But it is really, really important for lots of reasons.
Great. And would you get a real mix of, say, farming folk going to it and more urban, rural people going to the event?
Yes.
I suppose it's a great way of highlighting as well, I suppose, what's going on in agriculture at the moment, and how on a farm, and the importance of biodiversity, and what farmers are doing well for biodiversity.
Yes. One farmer said once to me, they're our shop window for farms. And I thought that was a lovely way of describing it, because as city people, countryside people drive through the countryside, they see hedges is the first thing they see on a farm.
Yeah.
They don't always see in the middle of the field, or maybe the bogland or the species-rich grassland inside, but they do see the hedges. So therefore, everybody has an opinion on hedges for a start. And, and there can be mixed reactions if you're driving along them or whatever. But yeah, there's certainly, everybody knows what a hedge is like. This time of the year, hopefully everybody knows what tasting a blackberry is like, and we're promoting blackberries at the moment. And wouldn't it be a pity if the next generation never fed, confident to pick a blackberry, to knowing what it is, knowing that it's safe. It's one of the most common fruits. So that's just one example. So, hedges and are really part of the Irish psychic, I think.
It's about the only time of year that you don't give out about briars, Catherine, getting caught in them. You can actually eat the blackberries off them, which is great.
It's a love-hate relationship there, definitely, Cathal. Yeah, you're all right. Yeah.
So you talked about the country people coming up into the villages and across the countryside and the hedgerows, and I think you focus over the years on hedgerows, and you've been running this event for a long time and we don't want the short back and sides, because that destroys everything. We want our hedgerows grown. But tell me about the different types of hedgerows, because they're not all the same.
They're not all the same, and I could show you 20 pictures of different hedges. But from a management point of view, Cathal, it's really, really helpful to divide them into two categories. And from a management point of view, and one of them being managed hedges, or I call them topped hedges, and the other category being those which are not topped, possibly never have been or are not going to be in the future, and we call them tree-lined hedges. I used to call them escaped hedges, but that sounded a little bit negative. But basically, the hedge has kind of escaped into a tree line. You could actually call it a linear woodland, but they're all in the basket. And I know Stuart Green's work from the past has shown that we've about half and half of hedges are, and you can see when you look out in the countryside, you'll see some tall tree-lined hedges and others that are topped. And that's the difference, and totally different animals they are.
And maybe, I know we're on a podcast now, so we'll have to use our imagination a little bit, but we might start off with the topped hedge and just kind of describe what does it actually look like, and what do you want to see, and what do you not want to see maybe in a topped hedge?
Yeah. Well, a topped hedge is probably what most people think of as a hedge, if you know what I mean. Um, it's managed. It's topped. So it's a. I mean, the definition of a hedge is just a line of shrubby species planted close together. Our new planting would be 5 per meter. But way back 200 years ago, when most of our hedges were planted, they were all the same. The topped hedges then were constantly managed to keep to a certain height, to keep as a hedge, and that is fine. Now sometimes the topped hedges have arisen out of where the tree line hedge has been cut back at a metre high and turned into a stumpy one. But either way, our existing topped hedges, what we're not we're happy with those being managed, but we want them as tall and as wide as possible to get bulk, rather than the tight, short back and sides that you mentioned. And what we're really asking is everybody to leave a clump of white thorns grow up in that topped hedge, which will give flowers and fruit. And we could actually transform the countryside, Cathal, if every farmer left one clump in every topped hedge. And it just makes it all so understandable afterwards, because where hedges are cut regularly, they don't produce flowers and fruit. Um, and the easiest way is to let a clump in every hedge grow up. And in a couple of years, now it takes a few years for flowers and fruit to come, but eventually you'll have a tree there with huge buckets of flowers and fruit. And we're not depending on the body of that hedge for flowers and fruit. So therefore it can be cut regularly. So light incremental annual trimming is fine for that hedge, provided you leave the clump of white thorns, and provided you have some of the other type of tree line hedges on your farm also.
So these are the ones that we would have traditionally loved, especially before time we had electric fences that were good, thick at the bottom that animals can't get through, and they're very, very dense. And then, but why is it so important to have, I suppose, for wildlife to have them dense at the bottom and right to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
floor?
you're right. The stock proofness would have been a huge issue. Not as important now, but can still be. But yeah, so that thick dense space is where the most of the birds nest. So you'll have the thrush and the robin and lots of the birds nesting all in different areas within the base of the hedge. You'll have hedgehogs and small mammals and shrews and underneath it, because there's great ground cover there. When the ground is frosty in the winter, again, that's where the thrush and the robin or the blackbird will be in picking the worms, because that ground won't be as frozen, the bit under the hedge. So that lovely big dense space, as wide and as tall as possible, is super for birds nesting primarily, but all sorts but doesn't have the flowers and fruit because it's been cut. So we must have flowers and fruit somewhere else.
Catherine, when you're looking at a hedge in the landscape, is it important to allow, say, trees to develop, or would you chop all along, or is there a specific distance between, say, trees and your stumpy hedge?
It's a good question. So every topped hedge, then I want every farmer to leave one clump of whitethorn this year. Now, so two things you might say, well, why only whitethorn and why only one? So whitethorn is because we're really missing the flowers and fruit. We have a whole whitethorn hedge with no flowers and fruit unless you leave that clump. So I've no problem to leave, and in the past reps would have got us to leave ash trees and different trees. I've no problem with other trees, but people do not think of leaving whitethorn. So that's the big change for a start. And then you'll have the flowers and fruit. If you want to leave others, that's fine. Now, you might say again, why only one? You can leave more, but what I would love is the farmer to leave more every time they cut. So you'll have different stages of growth, because that clump of thorns above, just a metre or so above the body of the hedge, is where you'll have the perching posts and the song posts for birds. So they won't be up in the top of a big oak tree. So you have different variety is the spice of life. So, the minimum is one clump of whitethorn left grow up. And I used to say one slip of a whitethorn, but that, number one, is very difficult to get for a hedge cutter. And number two, it can break, because obviously it's not as stable as where it was left from day one. So a small clump is what I'm talking about. And if you want to leave two, fine, but I'd love you to leave another one next year. Do you get me?
Great. With the whitethorn, if they're not naturally there on the farm, or they're not indigenous, say, to that specific area, where would you source them, or source healthy plants? Because I'm sure it's very important.
I don't know of a farm in the country that doesn't have whitethorn, Deirdre,
Right,
to be
okay.
honest. Now, there may be specific hedges, maybe along watercourses, that are alder and willow and that.
Yeah, yes,
But
yes.
the whitethorn is in every hedge. And I think that's the biggest question I get from farmers. They kind of say, I hate this tree rotation. And I say, why don't you leave a whitethorn clump in the hedge? And they say, I don't have whitethorn. What is whitethorn?
They can be
So
so well managed though
we
that they're
really
not
need,
there. Yeah.
yeah, but you leave it. You
Okay.
leave it. You leave the clump. You do not plant a new one. You
Okay.
leave it grow from within the existing hedge. And that's, I know, I appreciate it does need to be seen to be understood. And we have now
Yeah.
lots of farms, all our Teagasc farms are leaving a clump of whitethorn. And it's just so understandable. When farmers see it, they get it. So it's difficult. So just ask the contractor to leave a clump instead of topping the whole hedge.
Put a little marker on it, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah. It's easy in the beginning because it can be any clump rather than specifying which one, if you know what I mean. Just a clump of whitethorn. Just instead of cutting the whole thing, leave a half a metre or less than half a metre within that hedge.
And Catherine, are there any threats to the say the whitethorn species at the moment in the country? Would there be any, pests or diseases or
Yes, there's always threats of disease, and the most important thing, one, is obviously if you're planting, which we're not really talking about today, but if you're planting to
Mm.
plant native or Irish provenance species. But from a hedge cutting point of view, the most important point is not to have rough cuts. If
Okay.
you are cutting your prized garden hedge, you don't slash it. You would cut it neatly, and as a or the person doing the tree surgeon would do.
Okay.
And that's
Okay.
what we need on our hedges. So this is where light incremental cutting a tiny bit out further each day of our topped hedges is really important. Clean cuts, our disease will get in. And the problem often is that whitethorn hedges, our hedges, appear to survive, but sometimes they're dying underneath. They all will green up during the summer, and it's only when you look at them in November, December that you will see the stumps and the rough cuts and the disease getting in. So clean cuts is critical for hedge cutting.
Great. And what height would you allow that whitethorn to grow to?
For the topped hedge, now again, we must keep saying which hedge we're talking about when we're talking
Yeah.
about management. So we were still talking about our topped hedge, and
Yeah.
as high as possible, but as high as the hedge cutter will reach. Do you get me? And that can be
Fair enough.
different with different hedge cutters. It can also be different if they're on a slope or reaching. So it is really important with the topped hedge to keep that dense space to top it, to top the apical dominance. Otherwise, again, the leader will escape off and pull the growth up into a tree, which is fine if that's what you want. But so as wide and as tall as the hedge cutter will allow.
That's the top edge, so lovely and dense at the base, wide at the base, up as high as we can go into a triangular shape. And I often say to contractors, and I know you've done work with contractors, that it's nearly one less cut when they are cutting, because they don't have to go to the top as well. You're getting that triangular shape, and it's letting the light in, and you have room for the bird.
Save some money, Cathal.
Yeah. But
Absolutely. And you're going to save even more money when we start talking about the tree line hedges.
exactly. But I think it is important, I suppose, that some people wonder why farmers don't do these things, and it becomes a kind of a routine every year that it gets done, doesn't it, Catherine? And
Yeah.
the farmer kind of, it might be a busy time of the year, and the hedge cutter comes in to say, yeah, do the same as last year, but we have to, I suppose,
You have
work on
to
both
think,
sides, don't we?
why are we cutting?
Yes,
Why
yeah.
are we cutting? And that leads us on then to the tree line hedges.
Just describe the tree line hedge, and just maybe maybe I'll tell you what it's in my head, Catherine, and you
Yep.
tell me if I'm wrong or right. Because but if you don't manage when you plant a hedgerow correctly, if you don't cut it regularly so it gets dense at the base, if you just plant it and let it off, it just becomes almost like a tree, and there's not much at the butt. Is that am I correct in saying that?
Correct.
Yeah,
Because the natural hedges, the managed topped hedges are not natural. They're a
yeah,
man-managed habitat.
yeah,
So the tree line hedge is still a hedge because it's planted fairly densely. It's not. I mean, confusion, I suppose, is it's not a line of trees which are planted at 5 meters apart. So a tree line hedge is where it's a dense shrubby growth, but that each stem is growing up with apical dominance. Apical dominance means that the leader takes over. So the white thorn, the same as the oak, wants to grow up into being a tree. And while we're managing that with the topped hedge, with the tree line hedge, we're giving it free rein. To off it goes. Um, and then will reach its natural height, will produce buckets of flowers and fruit, and does not need to be cut. Now, don't confuse that with if it's in your way, if it's on a roadside, if it's on a farm road, if there's machinery passing close by, there is never any harm in side trimming. And again, you'd see lovely examples of this along the road where you'll see, the bottom side trimmed and then the top, flowering and fruiting freely with buckets of flowers and fruit. So we really need to value this tree line hedge. I probably haven't talked about it enough over the year because we don't want people to do much with it. It is the one that's under most threat. There's a lot of those when a farm is taken over with beautiful tree line hedges. Oftentimes they are just cut down, not removed anymore because we're not allowed to remove hedges except very, very, very rare safety circumstances. But the tree line hedges then are cut to maybe a metre or so above the ground, and really that's the end of the hedge, because if it's kept cut at that point, there's only a stump. For growth. So there's nothing. So we need to. They die on their feet, and you can see this as you drive along the road in November, December, January. You'll see the stumps. You'll see gaps then where the stump dies off eventually because it's been cut to the same level every year rather than incrementally. So your tree line hedge, leave it alone. Value it for what it is. It is not stock proof. Going back to your point, it is huge sources of carbon, and if we cut them down, we are losing serious amount of carbon. From a biodiversity point of view, you may not have as dense a base for the nesting birds, but there are other birds that use that. You'll have birds like the goldfinch and the green tit, the great tit. They nest in higher up in those kind of trees rather than the base of a hedge. It's, as I said, it's like a linear woodland. Um, Ideally, there'd be a grass margin alongside it, which would kind of again allow it to kind of thicken up at the base, kind of naturally, like a natural woodland. But either way, and the other big thing that people say to me is, "Oh, if I don't cut it, it'll come into spread into the field." But when you think logically about that tree line hedge with its canopy, it doesn't jump out from the top. It creeps in on underground, doesn't it? So if you graze or cut if it's a margin, you cut it or graze it, or if it's a normal, if the animals are grazing right up to the hedge, they're grazing it, and it will not, under normal farming, it will not. Scrub encroachment won't happen. Scrub encroachment happens when the grassland is abandoned. But the hedge itself does not need to be cut. Do you understand?
yeah. And I just want to be clear now as well for farmers to make sure they don't make a mistake. And we talked about the top hedge, which is the good dense hedge right to the ground, and now we're talking about the tree line hedge, which is almost like trees, and
Yes.
the bottom is, it's like just trunks nearly almost.
Yeah.
And but just the farmers don't make the mistake that, and you've mentioned this, that if you cut that right down, it will not recover at that stage because the trunks are too big. They're not going to bush out at that stage. That's
Yeah,
all that. Yeah,
especially if it's kept in cut, which is what usually happens. And it's dead by 1,000 cuts. It doesn't die
yeah,
immediately. It's over. We know the condition of them top hedges are very poor unless they've been built up properly. And a lot of the older ones haven't. So, one way, and we have an aim for every farm to have at least 50% of their hedges in the tree line hedge. So if you have a farm and a lot of your hedges have been managed, And maybe there's some hedges that you could allow escape up into a tree line hedge, even at this stage. It may not be a perfectly neat one because it'll be kind of a stump with a fringe, and then you're letting it grow up again. But that's how you will get it into a healthy hedge.
Yeah, and just on that, like from a farmer's point of view, they look amazing. Those tree line hedges when they're in bloom, they're unbelievable. And this summer, I just noticed the cattle down this part of the country, it was very very hot. We didn't get the rain a lot of country got. It was very hot, and the cattle absolutely love getting in under that shelter, even getting a bit of a back scratch if they can. It's a major benefit to a farmer.
Absolutely. And I think, talking to advisors lately, they've told me that farmers need to be reassured that they do not have to cut hedges under schemes. Sometimes people think, I must do it. So there, think before you cut. You do not have to cut hedges for derogation. You do not have to cut them for acres. They will not encroach into the field unless the field isn't grazed or cut. So at least half the hedges could be left into tree line hedges, not cut. And that, providing you have that with those buckets of flowers and fruit, you can then continue, which farmers love to do, annually trim their topped hedges, provided again they leave some clumps of whitethorn flowers in each of those, so that you'll have some, spread through the farm.
Catherine, ideally you'd have, corridors of hedges for as habitats on the farm. Is there any obvious difference in the type of biodiversity, mammal life or insect life, that's attracted to a topped versus a tree-lined hedge?
Definitely. Definitely, Deirdre. Yeah, like the structure will facilitate totally different things, and that's why we want both. Yeah, so the biodiversity in the tree line hedge is primarily in the canopy. So you have this big canopy full of flowers and fruit, full of butterflies and bees and the maybe less nesting sites at the base, whereas the topped hedge then has the ground cover. So
Yeah.
now that's very simplistic. Obviously, there's a crossover and there's lots in between. But in principle, yes, they're very, very different. The tree line hedge both will allow corridors of movement. The birds and the bats and the bees and the owls goes out at night. They will follow both of those. Probably, so you have, yeah.
You'll have a diversity of ecosystems where you have
correct.
both.
And as we know, biodiversity thrives on, not everything being the same.
The same. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
even within my two types, there'll obviously be variation. But as I said, so the more diverse you have, it's not about having them all the same, and definitely not having them all neat and tidy.
And is there any age, or if you're trying to develop one of these ideal hedges or hedge systems on your farm, is there any stage, if you're just in the development, that they can be managed? Or is it all along, or do you leave it for 3 years? Or
Well, the tree line hedge, I suppose, if you want to bring them back into a topped hedge, they can be laid or rejuvenated by proper hand laying or coppicing. So that's ideally a new hedge, you do that maybe at 12 or 15 years. But the old ones can be done, but look, they're so valuable. I would rather
yeah,
leave them alone, but done right, that's fine.
okay,
The topped hedge, again, depending on what species are in it, the main thing is that it's cut without leaving damage. So oftentimes if you're using a flail that's only suited to soft material, and you want to keep inside the wires, annual cutting is fine. But some then may be left on, 2 yearly, 3 yearly, depending on your system. So again, think before you cut, look at the outcome of it. But we want clean cuts, healthy hedges, and we want fruit and flowers on the farm. Every hedge doesn't have to do everything.
and that's good to know. And they'll learn all of this over Hedgerow Week, won't they? All of this information will be
On Hedgerow Week, yes. So there'll be webinars on the two Friday mornings, that's Friday the 29th and Friday the 5th, our signpost webinar. I think if people Google it, Deirdre, I think they find the link to join it.
absolutely.
We have a very important day on hedge cutting with contractors and with machines in Kildalton on Thursday, the 4th, isn't it? Sorry, it's Thursday the 4th, yes, in Kildalton, from 11 o'clock until 2 o'clock. So really calling on anybody thinking about cutting hedges, farmers or contractors. Contractors cut, I think, about 80% of our hedges. But
Yeah.
obviously, so we need both farmers and contractors to understand. Contractors will do what they're asked to do. There's no question about that. He who pays the piper. But, oftentimes it's that the farmer doesn't, Francis Quigley, our machinery specialist who's running the day, is, constantly says, you must talk to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Does the contractor realize how much power they have in cutting a hedge? Because I know that somewhat my friend does a lot of hedge cutting, and I'd be always talking about this stuff. But he says generally he gets a text message or WhatsApp say, "Hey, call down to me whenever you get a chance when the hedge cutter's on and sort that out." And that's it. Like that's the only conversation. So and he decides then what way it's cut.
That's exactly. So you can't blame him then. But
Yeah,
perhaps we would love contractors to ask the farmers, shall I do something more environmentally as Teagasc and the Heritage Council are recommending, or so
yeah.
it's the conversation.
Just think about it. Yeah,
Think about it. Ask. Obviously, the contractor will do what the farmer wants, and that's fine. But the farmer needs to think about what they're asking the contractor to do. As they would at silage or any other operation, wouldn't they, Cathal? They'd be very clear as to which field to cut.
Exactly.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
I think the main thing that we have to focus on here today is that we're not asking farmers to do anything that'll affect their business. It's actually, and the new way of thinking now is, and when we're driving the roads now, we're looking at the hedges you're describing, Catherine. When we see those hedges cut to the butt, we're cringing going by them. And I think people are starting to think like that as well, because we want to improve biodiversity. And I think farmers are thinking that way now as well. It's just a matter of getting, knowing what to do and getting a bit of direction.
Again, summarise, at least half the hedges on your farm, if you could just let them grow freely, with minimal side trimming as needed. And that then allows you to cut your other hedges, manage them, but it just leaves some whitethorn clumps in them.
That's super. And just to let you know, I think the corridors are good on my farm because I had a bat in the kitchen last night, but we got him out safely, him or her out safely, safe and sound. So yeah. So Catherine, any final words from you then, maybe just to promote Hedgerow Week, because I know you've put a lot of work into this over the last number of years, and you're starting into it again. So do you have anything for our listeners?
No, just Brian Clancy and Francis Quigley and myself then come to Kildalton on the Thursday the 4th at 11 o'clock. See you all in practice.
That's super. Catherine, you're doing a great job, and I know you've been working on this for years, so keep up the good work, and we're definitely seeing the results of your work on farms, particularly when the flowering season on the white and blackthorns comes out. It just looks amazing across the country. So keep up the good work, and best of luck with Hedgerow Week. Thanks a million for joining us.
Thank you very much. You're John Cahill.
So there you have it. Tune in next time to hear more interesting chats and discussion.
Myself and Deirdre will be back in 2 weeks' time, but do give us a review on Apple and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening to the Environment Edge podcast.